Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott. I had a really narrow window here before I had to send these two lenses back to their respective manufacturers, and so I thought I would seize the opportunity of having them both at the same time and do a little bit of head-to-head competition between the brand new Sigma 70-200mm F2.8. This is their DN Sport series lens. For Sony E-mount, this is the Tamron 70-180mm F2.8 G2 lens, also for Sony E-mount. We finally have some quality alternatives to the very expensive $2,800 Sony 70-200mm F2.8 G Master Mark II lens. That lens is fantastic, by the way, and I think that all things being equal, it is the winner between these three, just so you know. But it's only a winner by a small margin in some areas. These two lenses represent a really good alternative, both amazing lenses, both with some comparative strengths and weaknesses. So what I'm going to do here today is that I'm going to give you my general observations from these various tests, the places where I felt like the Tamron pulled off a win, the place where I felt like the Sigma pulled off a win. But if you're interested in the deeper dive and the actual visual evidence of these things, at the end of that, I will give a image quality breakdown where I show you head to head how and why I drew the conclusions that I did. So stay tuned for that if you're interested in a little bit deeper dive. But let's start off by talking about reasons to choose the Tamron. The first of those is price. The Tamron comes to market at a price point of $1,299 while the Sigma is $1,499. And so we do have a $200 difference. Not a huge difference, but certainly a price advantage if you're on a tight budget. And very clearly, this Tamron has the advantage when it comes to the size, and that's even more so if you just look at the bare lenses side by side. This almost seems to be in a different class of lens compared to the Sigma, which is slightly the largest and definitely the heaviest lens in the class. And so definitely if you're looking for a size and weight advantage, the Tamron is 83 millimeters in diameter versus 90.6 millimeters for the Sigma. It is 156.5 millimeters in length compared to 205 millimeters for the Sigma. And of course, the Tamron is an externally zooming lens. You can probably put that into the negative category versus the Sigma, which is internally zooming. But to make the point here, you can see that even with the Tamron fully zoomed out, it still is significantly shorter than what the Sigma is. Another advantage for the Tamron is the weight, and that is an unarguable one. It comes in at only 855 grams, making it the lightest lens in the class, versus 1,345 grams for the Sigma. That is essentially a 500 gram difference between the two. So this is the lightest in the class, the Sigma is the heaviest in the class. So that's a win for Tamron, particularly for those of you who want to travel light. The Tamron has a 67mm front filter thread. The Sigma has a 77mm front filter thread. Neither one of those is uncommon, but the advantage for the Tamron is that Tamron has very purposely built an ecosystem in all of their Sony E-mount lenses, with only a couple of exceptions, where you can use a 67mm filter thread on all of those. And you have to cite that as an advantage, because if you own multiple Tamron lenses in a particular class, you can buy one set of filters, you can share it across them without having to deal with, step-up rings and all of those various things. And so you're going to spend less money on filters because of the compact size, but also the ability to share them across multiple lenses. The Tamron also has an advantage of having a higher magnification. That's a higher magnification at 180 millimeters versus 200 millimeters, but the Tamron's highest magnification actually comes at 70 millimeters, and it is significantly higher than what the Sigma offers. 0.38 times at the highest magnification for the Tamron versus only 0.19 times for the Sigma, meaning that the Tamron is capable of basically double the magnification of the Sigma. Now, I'm going to give a little bit of an asterisk to that I will elaborate on in the image quality breakdown. And so we can see that in just a few moments. Tamron has started to implement weather-sealed USB-C ports on their lenses. And so that not only allows you to do quick firmware updates more conveniently than what you can do them in camera, by the way, by a long shot. but also it gives you the advantage of being able to customize the lens. And in fact, Tamron has fewer controls on it, but ironically, it has more ability to customize, at least in the Sony E-mount version, than what the Sigma lens does. For the Leica L-mount version of the Sigma lens, there is an available dock that allows you to do a little bit more customization and tweaking. The Tamron can actually be customized in a number of ways. The USB-C port is built right into it, and the software to do that is free. And so the Tamron actually gives you a little bit more control in terms of customizing and setting up the lens as you would like. And it's not just the function of the switch or the button here, it's the amount of rotation in the manual focus ring, it's the direction of the manual focus ring, all of those various things. And on that note, I will note that the Tamron lens also has the advantage of zooming and focusing in the same direction as Sony lenses, whereas for some reason Sigma persists in zooming the opposite direction. The Tamron, as far as both of these are really great optical lenses, and as we're going to see in the image quality breakdown, there's mostly just give and take between them. The Tamron does have an advantage, I would say, of having consistently slightly nicer bokeh. And it's not by a wide margin, but I would say that the evidence points towards the Tamron for that. And so, another reason to choose the Tamron. So how about some reasons to choose the Sigma? Well, obviously, it does have an additional 20 millimeters of focal length, though like with one of the points on the Tamron, I'm going to put an asterisk next to that because it's a little bit more complicated than what it seems, and we'll dive into that during the image quality breakdown. What is inarguable is the Sigma has a much better build quality. The Tamron G2 version is improved, the materials are nice, but this feels like a pro-grade lens, whereas the Tamron still feels more like a mid-grade lens in terms of the build. So the materials are nicer here. Also, it has much more features and controls on it. It has an aperture ring, it has more switches, has not only the aperture ring, but the ability to declick that aperture ring, it has aperture lock. It has just a lot of controls that make it the equal of the G Master lens in terms of those controls. Tamron, you can get some of those things by using the custom switches, but as far as just having a setup of controls on there, the Sigma is the winner when it comes to the overall set of features and controls on it. That includes having 3 different custom or function buttons as opposed to just having one of those on the Tamron, and so that means that in multiple positions you'll have one to access on the Sigma, whereas with the Tamron you just have the standard position right under the bank of switches there. The Sigma has lower magnification, but as we're going to see in our image quality breakdown, it does give you better performance up close. In fact, it is razor sharp up close, which allows those close-up images to look really, really fantastic, making it a great option to maybe throw an extension tube on and increase that magnification because it can perform so well. Both of these have dual, essentially high-powered linear motors, focus motors, as a part of them. And both of them can focus extremely quickly. But I did feel that the Sigma was the winner in terms of just the reactiveness. It feels like in all scenarios that the Sigma is just incredibly sharp, are incredibly fast to focus, and there's no lag, there's no spool up, anything like that. The Tamron is also very good, but I did find in low light situations that I think there's more power in the focus motors of the Sigma. I felt like it was a little bit more responsive at the margins in those lower light conditions and a little bit more difficult focus situations than what the Tamron was. So I'm going to give a win to the Sigma on that. The OS is clearly better on the Sigma lens. I found that the VC on the Tamron lens was a little bit jumpy and choppy sometimes. The Sigma system works better, it's smoother, it is a little bit more consistent, but it also gives you more stabilization. And so in this series of shots, you can see that with the Tamron, there's only a few exceptionally still shots. This is both of them shot at around 180 to 190 millimeters. I try to make it as close as possible, so right in that range. And both of them were shooting at a 1/8 of a second shutter speed. And so, definitely a challenge, but the Sigma definitely provided more keepers, as you can see here, and did a better job of providing some actually perfectly stable shots, whereas the Tamron, at best, it was close. So the OS is definitely better in the Sigma lens. The Sigma also, I felt like, again, give and take between them. But one area where I felt like optically the Sigma was superior is that I think it consistently delivered a little bit better contrast, particularly in real world situations. And so I'm going to give it an edge there. So a quick conclusion is that both of these are excellent lenses. I think that they both are maybe serving a different purpose. They both fight against the same Sony limitations. You can't use teleconverters with either one on Sony. Both of them are going to hit up against the maximum burst rate of 15 frames per second, even on the sport bodies on Sony lenses. That's an artificial limitation. So if you want to be able to use teleconverters or unlock the fastest burst rate on your Sony sports cameras, you're going to have to look at that G Master lens. But both of these face those same challenges, but if you eliminate those, and those are not deal breakers for you, they are both fantastic lenses. And so after spending time with both of them, I would say this. If you want to travel light, the Tamron is the clear winner. It is the lightest lens in the class. It's the smallest lens in the class, but it delivers great autofocus and very great optical performance. You can use that, and you can know, if you look at the image quality breakdown, that in fact you're not even losing much in terms of the focal length, even though it stops at 180 millimeters relative to the Sigma. Choose the Sigma if you want the GM lens, but you can't afford it. The Sigma is basically the budget G Master lens. It has all of the features and all of the performance of the G Master lens, except for those limitations that I point to. And I would say at the end of the day, the Sony probably focuses just a little bit better. It's got quad focus motors instead of the dual focus motors in these. But outside of those two things, I think Sigma is delivering basically everything that the Sony lens offers up at a much, much cheaper price. I mean, we're talking about a $1,300 difference between the two. And so if you want a GM lens but can't afford it, go with the Sigma. If you want to travel light, go with the Tamron. I'm Dustin Abbott, and I hope that this has helped you here today. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and you can look in the description down below to see links to my full reviews of both of these lenses. Now, if you want more, stay with me and let's dive into the image quality breakdown. So for this series of comparisons, I'm going to keep the Sigma on the left and I'm going to put the Tamron on the right. That'll help you to distinguish which is which. So starting off, taking a look at vignette and distortion at 70 millimeters, you can see that the distortion pattern on the Tamron lens is a little bit more pronounced than what we see on the Sigma. To correct the Sigma, I used a -3 for the distortion and a +27 for the vignette. For the Tamron, I used a -4, so just a hair more correction for the distortion, but a +50 for the vignette. So definitely an area where the Tamron has a disadvantage, about 2/3 of a stop. Now on the telephoto end, we can see that both have a similar amount of pincushion distortion, but you can tell that the Tamron has significantly more vignette. I used a -8 to correct the distortion on the Sigma and a +21, a very little amount to correct for vignette. On the Tamron, I used a -9 to correct for the distortion, so about similar, but once again, the vignette is even more of a difference. In this case, we're closer to 3 stops compared to the 1 stop for the Sigma. So the Sigma is definitely a winner in the vignette department. Of course, it does have a 77mm front filter dimension compared to the 67mm of the Tamron. Now we can see that neither lens really suffers much from longitudinal chromatic aberration. As we take a look at the test chart here, we can see that there really isn't any fringing before or after the plane of focus with either lens. Now, if we compare the resolution and contrast at 70 millimeters, this is at 200% magnification on a 61 megapixel A7R Mark V. We can see in the middle of the frame at 70 millimeters that the Tamron is the winner in terms of the overall detail and contrast. It just pops a little bit more. If we pan off towards the mid frame here, we can see that the results are less significant. The two lenses are more similar than different. In this area here, I would favor the contrast slightly from the Sigma. Moving down here, the same is true. The Sigma looks a little bit better. And off into the corners are very, very close. It would be hard for me to call a winner. I would call the Sigma the winner in the mid frame. We can see, looking on this side of the frame, about similar results over on the far left. I would slightly favor the Sigma there. Moving up here, Very, very similar. I would say just a little bit more for Sigma. And up into the left corner, we can see that the results are largely similar, but with a little bit more contrast for the Sigma. So what we take away is that the Tamron's sharper in the center, but the Sigma is a little bit better in this mid-frame zone. And then you get to the corners and the Tamron catches up again, and they're about equal. Now at the telephoto end, that's 200 millimeters for the Sigma, 180 millimeters for the Tamron. We can see that in the middle of the frame, once again, the Tamron is maybe just a hair sharper. It's very, very close, but the two lenses show just a little bit of variance there. In this mid-frame, they both look really, really excellent. Hard for me to call a winner there. If we pan down here, we can see that once again in this zone, I think the Sigma gives a little bit better contrast figure. Moving down this direction, very, very close, perhaps just a hair more for Sigma. And then off into the very corner, the Sigma is a little bit sharper and has better contrast there. Over on this side, we can see that they look very, very similar in this zone. Maybe a hair more contrast for the Sigma. And over here on the far left side, close, but I'm going to slightly favor the Tamron in terms of the contrast and detail there. You can see here in the hair, just a little bit more delineation. If we pop up to this zone here, and I'll center them, we can see both of them look really, really good. Hard for me to call a winner there. I'm going to call that a draw. And then up into the upper left corner, we can see that I would slightly favor the Sigma's result there. So once again, some give and take, which is pretty consistent throughout this zoom range. They're both incredibly sharp, and if you put them side by side in a torture test, you're not really going to call a clear winner. There's some give and take across the frame. So up close, we can see that on the telephoto end, which is not the Tamron's highest magnification level, but we can see that it delivers just a slightly higher degree of magnification, basically 0.21 versus 0.19 times. And so just a minor improvement there. However, the Tamron's biggest kind of resolution or magnification, however, the Tamron's biggest magnification comes on the 70mm end, where you can see it is capable of a much higher level of magnification. I believe it's 0.34 times. Now, as far as the performance up close, we can see that the Sigma, it kind of claws back a little bit here because it really is fantastically sharp up close. And we're going to see that becomes relevant in just a moment. Now, the Tamron is good, I would say, but the Sigma is better in terms of its overall pop, contrast, and detail. So in a sense, we have a bit of a draw here once again, in that the Sigma doesn't have as good of magnification, so that's a disadvantage, but it does have the superior performance up close. So in a real-world comparison, you can see how that plays out. So obviously the Tamron has the ability to give you a higher magnification. That's also going to give you larger, softer bokeh in the background, more compression of the background in that sense, whereas the Sigma is delivering a lower amount of magnification. But we can see, once again, that up close, the Tamron just isn't quite as good at rendering the fine details, and that becomes even more clear in a three-dimensional setting. Whereas you can see that in that area of focus, that the Sigma is doing a better job. It's really, really crisp up close. Now, if we look over into the bokeh area, here's an area where we'll examine this a little bit more, but there is probably a little bit more win for the Tamron than there is for the Sigma. The Tamron maybe has a hair more outlining, but the Sigma has more of, you call it onion bokeh, just those concentric circles, generalized busyness in the bokeh circles. And also you'll notice that the Tamron does a little bit better job of having circular shapes closer out to the edge of the frame. Now, this particular test is an interesting one in that I fully anticipated that because of the 20mm difference in focal length that I was going to have some radically different framing. So I was shocked after I first shot with the Sigma, and then I lined up with the Tamron that I got pretty much the same framing. We can see, looking at the image at large, that they're framing fairly similarly. The Sigma is just a very hair tighter, looking more like maybe 5mm difference rather than 20mm difference. And so we can see, taking a look here, both of them are really, really sharp in this particular shot. But the size of objects in the frame is only very, very, very slightly more magnified than what the Tamron is. And so you can see here with the Sigma, the diameter of that is just a little bit larger than it is here, but the difference between the two is really, really insignificant. And if we look at all of these various objects that are framed here, again, the Tamron or the Sigma is ever so slightly larger, but it is not hardly noticeable unless you have them side by side. Likewise, in this shot here, we can see similar kind of thing that really they kind of deliver a very similar kind of result. Now, we're going to spend a few seconds here on this image just kind of checking out a few other things. So looking at some of these shiny surfaces, this is an area where very typically I'm going to see longitudinal chromatic aberrations. And so we can see that neither one of these lenses is giving any kind of issue with that. The textures are clearly defined. There's not really any kind of bleeding even in these light areas. What we can see, however, is that the contrast on the Sigma holds up just a little bit better. And you can see it in areas like this. Now, I did find that they did not always meter the same. In this case, the metering for the subject is probably a little bit better on the Tamron, but they just bear that in mind that the metering is not identical. I do feel like the Sigma delivers a little bit crisper contrast compared to the Tamron. Both of them are obviously just ridiculously sharp, but here in a real-world setting, I would slightly favor the performance from the Sigma lens. Now here you can see the focus distance. We are about 6 to 7 feet away, a couple of meters from this bookshelf. And so at that particular distance, you can see that yes, the Tamron is ever so slightly different in terms of the framing, but you can see that it is not significant at all. Now, once again, I do feel like the contrast slightly favors the Sigma in this particular shot, but if we kind of line things up and we look at the amount of magnification, it really is very, very similar. And so you can see that, yes, in this particular instance, we can see that the framing, it's not identical. I tried to line them up as much as possible. So the Tamron is ever so slightly wider, but if I look up here on the top end, we can see that the lineup is not identical. So the difference in the framing, particularly if you look at the magnification of different things, is really not significant at all. We'll take a look at this little house right here, and you can see that the Sigma, I think, has done a better job with the actual rendering of it, but we can see that in terms of the size that it occupies the frame, or this, old-fashioned radio here, the size of them is not significantly different. So out of curiosity, I thought I would take it to a further distance. And so here we're more like 40 feet, say 13 meters or so. And you can see that there is a little bit more difference in the framing here. So just out of curiosity, I counted the bricks that would be in the frame across this top row, comparing the two. So what I found is that the Tamron has the equivalent of 23 bricks in frame, while the Sigma has 21 bricks in frame. So it is, in this case, framing tighter. But even at a more of, not quite infinity distance, but a much further distance, you can continue to see that the amount of difference in framing is not as significant as what you might think. And so again, let's look at this spot right here. And you can see it is definitely more magnified on the Sigma, but not by a significant degree. So that 20 millimeter difference in focal length maybe isn't as big a deal as what you might think. So likewise, in this shot here, it's the same distance. This is 180 millimeters. This is 200 millimeters. And we can see that the difference is minuscule. I mean, it is just within a few millimeters. And so my only conclusion can be that the Sigma must do some focus breathing, whereas the Tamron, in its externally zooming design, is able to not do any of that focus breathing, which allows you to have a little bit more than what that 180 millimeters suggest, and a little bit less than what that 200 millimeters suggest. So let's take a little bit closer look at the bokeh quality. Now, in this particular shot, I shot the Tamron first, but basically everything that I do, Nala thinks that she needs to be a part of it, and so very quickly she jumped into frame. So we're going to have to ignore her. She really wouldn't leave me alone for this. So in this case, one thing that's interesting to me is that both these are at 1/20th of a second here. So they're composed very similarly. You can see, however, that the Tamron is delivering a slightly brighter image compared to the Sigma. Now, frankly, that surprised me a little bit because the Tamron has a smaller front dimension, 67mm filter thread versus a 77mm filter thread here. And so it's interesting to me that the Tamron would deliver the brighter image, which is not necessarily what I would expect. But we're here more to talk about bokeh. So let's take a look at a few of these areas. So we can see here that looking at this particular out of focus area, I wouldn't say that there is anything there significant to point to. Looking over here at says home here, we can see that both of them are delivering a really soft area. The Tamron has just a very slightly creamier look, but that could be in part because it's exposing a little bit brighter. The shadows are lifted a little bit more. And so there's not really a big takeaway there. Both of them are delivering, I would say, similar type bokeh in this kind of setting. As we look at these out of focus areas, they just really don't look particularly different. I would maybe very slightly favor the Tamron for that overall look of softness, but as we can see, it really is nothing significant that we're looking at. Now, once again, in this particular shot, interestingly, the faster exposure is actually on the Sigma, but the brighter image, I would say, actually belongs to the Tamron. So again, interesting, the light transmission may slightly favor the Tamron. We can see if we look in at these that both of them deliver really, really fabulous results. I mean, that detail on Nala's fur is fabulous. And since she jumped up there, I thought I might as well use her. Obviously, with a moving target, you can't get them to stay still long enough to be identical, but we can see that both of these lenses deliver a really fabulous amount of detail, but they do deliver a different look. The Tamron look is perhaps a little bit more cinematic. The Sigma look is a little bit more high contrast, and Sigma is doing contrast really, really well with this particular lens. If we try to look at the out of focus area, frankly, I have a hard time. I've already looked through it. I don't really see much of a difference here. If we look towards like the back of Nala as we transition towards defocus, I mean, in both cases, the edging looks pretty much the same. It's just not a lot of conclusions I can draw from that. But we'll look at one final image that I think kind of shows the pros and cons for both lenses. And so in this case, if we take a look here, we can see that I'm definitely favor at closer distances the performance of the Sigma as far as the detail and contrast. Really, really fantastic job. The downside of detail and contrast is shown here, and that sometimes that produces a little bit busier bokeh than what the opposing lens does here. So there's not a radical difference, but there's definitely a little bit more busyness in these circles than what there is on the Tamron. So the Tamron gives us ever so slightly nicer looking bokeh, at least when it comes to the specular highlights like this. As you can see throughout this series, there's a lot of give and take. These are both excellent optical instruments. They both have very slight strengths and weaknesses compared to the other. Well, if you've stuck to the end, thank you for watching. I hope that this has helped you to make a more informed decision about which one of these lenses is going to go into your bag. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.